Hey guys, welcome to my channel. I hope you're all doing very well. So I just watched Uncharted. Let's talk about it. So Uncharted is directed by Ruben Fleischer, who also directed Venom. Anyways, so this movie is yet another example of Hollywood trying to go for the video game market and creating a video game movie hybrid that pleases no one. Neither the fans of the video game and neither the fans of movies in general. But were they successful this time around? Well, I'm going to tell you guys my thoughts on this movie in a sec, but before we get into it, as per usual, if you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe to my channel and make sure you turn on your notifications so that you can be told when I upload next. Now without further ado, let's get into my thoughts on Uncharted. So like I said, Uncharted is yet another video game movie, and Sony wants you to know this as soon as possible, as soon as your butt hits that theatre seat. Because what they've done is created like a Marvel-esque title sequence, except with all of the PlayStation properties, like all of the video game properties that they own, and it's kind of crazy. First of all, it took me a second to even know what was going on. For a second there I thought it was an ad for PlayStation that they were playing after rolling the title sequence for the production company for the film. I thought it was bizarre. I did think it was a bit bizarre to have a PlayStation games ad in the middle of the opening title sequence for this film, until I realized it was actually the opening sequence for the PlayStation games cinematic universe. But they're not calling it that. They're not even calling it that because literally they just called it PlayStation products. Like the film is part of PlayStation products. What the hell does that mean? Ugh, that's awful. Name PlayStation products to name a cinematic universe smells of out of touch executive to me. And also this whole thing is so classic Sony. Before they have even walked, before they have even crawled, they are already running to a cinematic universe. Sony, have you not learned your lesson? Now that we've dealt with the whole PlayStation products fiasco, let's get into the fact that this movie is directed by Ruben Fleischer. Even though I was somewhat surprised to see that he had also directed the first Venom movie, I wasn't surprised ultimately when I thought about it for more than 2 seconds, because it makes sense. It makes sense that these two movies would be directed by the same person because they both have the same issue, which is they feel like they were made in the 90s/early 2000s. What's going on? What has gone on here? Okay, Ruben Fleischer needs to be woken up from his 90s/early 2000s coma that he's in. Okay, where he's directing these films that are made for that era, and he needs to be informed that we are like 20 to 30 years ahead, and that the directing style that he was employing back in the day just doesn't quite work anymore, because his films feel dated. This film just came out in the UK last week, and it hasn't even come out yet in the US. Like, its release is literally in the future and it already feels dated. Make that make sense. When it comes to the story itself, those of you guys who have played the games are already probably aware, but for those of us who have never played a single PlayStation game in their entire lives, we were in for a tiny bit more of a surprise. Although again, if you've watched the trailer, nothing is a surprise. But this film basically centers on the character of Nathan Drake, who's portrayed by Tom Holland. We'll talk about him in a second, okay? But he and his brother Sam Drake, back when they were younger, were really passionate about history and about, you know, exploration during the 15th and 16th centuries. And they even believed, at least that's what their parents told them, that they are descendants of Sir Francis Drake. Now, this was my warning sign number one. Warning sign number one, because if you've watched my Jungle Cruise review, which psych, you haven't, because I filmed that review and accidentally deleted it from my phone, whatever. I'm still bitter about that. Anyways, I accidentally deleted that review, but in that review, I spoke at length about my derision, about my contempt towards explorer movies because of the lack of acknowledgement of colonialism, of the colonial undertones that these movies tend to have. And even though films like Jungle Cruise Cruise, you know, more modern contemporary films do try to address these issues, they still end up glamorizing the culture surrounding exploration, which actually turned out to just be colonialism, like just oppression of native peoples and the pillaging and sacking of their lands and of their precious artifacts and natural resources. So I'm not a fan of this genre. Personally, I'm not a fan of this genre of film and TV, just putting that out there very clearly now. But anyways, we're in it now, so let's discuss. We have these two kids who believe they are descendants of Sir Francis Drake, the Elizabethan era explorer, and they're really passionate about all of this history. And there's this map in a local museum that Sam convinces Nathan to help him steal, but of course they get caught and they end up getting split because they are also orphans. Okay, so they're also orphans who are fending from themselves and living in this orphanage until of course Sam got kicked out because this was the final straw and he committed one too many crimes and he ended up in juvie, I think. So they were also split up, leaving Nathan on his own. And so he obviously has this very traumatic backstory that they establish him with. And then we skip over to the present day where we see Nathan working as a bartender, and he has some pretty sick bartending skills. Was Tom Holland actually doing those skills? Like, was he actually doing those tricks? Because if so, very impressive. If so, that is very, very impressive. I'll say that much right now. But when it comes to the story overall, even though the backstory is a little bit convoluted, like, did he need to have, you know, dead parents and a lost brother and this and that and be descendants of, you know, Sir Francis Drake? Did we need all of that? Not really. But still, we have that backstory established at the beginning of the film, and then this leads into a pretty simple kind of explorer mission. We have Nathan meeting Victor Sully, who's portrayed by Mark Wahlberg, and can I just say now, this I believe is the first ever film that I have watched that stars Mark Wahlberg. I never watched any of the Transformers. Like, I never did any transforming of my own, okay? So I think this is pretty much the first film, at least the one that he has like a lead role in, because I really don't think I've watched another Mark Wahlberg, because I remember thinking like, this is how Mark Wahlberg acts. But anyways, it turns out that Victor Sully has also heard of these, you know, myths and legends surrounding this missing treasure, this gold, that Sam and Nathan were really excited about as kids. And he has a very similar map to the one that was in the museum. And he also has one of these keys that's like the key element, if you will, of this whole mystery. And he is looking to obtain the second key, and he believes that Nathan can help him with that. And so the two go on this journey, and it's made complicated by the fact that, you know, Victor and Sam have a past. You know, they tried to do this before, but something went wrong, and so yeah, like chaos ensues, and they make new friends along the way and make new enemies. And speaking of enemies, this is just a small spoiler for those of you who don't want to know anything going into this film, but Antonio Banderas portrays the villain in this film, and he is barely in it. This is so clearly just a paycheck for him, like, wow. And I knew it was a paycheck for him. Like, he's Antonio Banderas and this is Uncharted. Please, I knew it was a paycheck for him, but I did not expect just how little he is in this film, just how little his presence is felt before he is promptly replaced with Tati Gabrielle. And honestly, the film is in good hands. It's in capable hands, because she made for a very convincing villain. She had such a cool look to her, and I believe she had a very similar look in Sabrina, the Netflix series Sabrina the Witch, whatever it was called. She looked really, really cool there, and I do know that she actually did her own hair because of hairstyling issues behind the scenes, but she created a really cool look for herself, and it's something that she was able to replicate here. So yeah, I'm a really big fan of hers, and I do think she delivered in this film, but I do think to some extent she was miscast, because it was supposed to be Antonio Banderas versus Tom Holland and Mark Wahlberg, and so it felt a little bit unbalanced when he promptly was removed from the equation. Okay, so we're out of spoilers now, and I'll just say, when it comes to the plot in general, it's general. Like, it's the most general, you know, by the numbers thing I have ever seen. I have ever seen. At least Jungle Cruise had like the boat as like an interesting element, although boats do play a role here as well, because that's where the treasure is. It's on these two boats from the 15th or 16th century. But overall, like, the story is just dumb. Like, it's so silly. Also, my question, this is like a general legal question, perhaps it's because of my legal background, but you know, when you have this missing treasure that was hidden by pirates or explorers or whatever, say for example the treasure is in the Philippines. I'm asking to the audience here. Say for example the treasure is in the Philippines, right, which it is in this film. Who does that treasure belong to? Like, even if you have these explorers come along and find the treasure that's been missing for 400 years, they can't just then approach this treasure, stuff it in a bag, in a duffel bag, and then, you know, yeet out of there. They can't do that because the treasure belongs to someone, right? And I think one answer is Antonio Banderas's character's family, because here he portrays a descendant of a very powerful Spanish family, and this family 400 years ago was, you know, one of the funders of these explorations to begin with. And that was very much the case in real life. These explorers had to be paid by someone. These journeys were incredibly expensive and difficult, and so they had to have some sort of funding. So the idea of Antonio Banderas's character's family having roots in that, and the roots of their wealth being, you know, full of blood and tragedy and murder, I think was really interesting. And again, it's a shame that he's taken out of the equation so quickly in the film. Oh, sorry, that's a spoiler. Anyways, then my question is, again, does he actually have any legitimate claim to the gold that was technically stolen from his family 400 years ago when it was hidden instead of delivered to them? Or perhaps does the gold belong to the Philippines, like the actual country itself? In which case, why am I rooting for Tom Holland? Why am I rooting for Tom Holland to steal this gold? That makes no sense. I, of course, would be rooting for the Philippines to obtain that treasure that's on their land, that was from their people to begin with, so they can, you know, use it for the economy or something, like the betterment of the actual Filipino people. So yeah, that's my question when it comes to these like lost treasure movies and plot points. I know I'm looking too deeply into it, but like, who does that treasure actually belong to? They try to establish Nathan's connection to the gold and the treasure as being a way of connecting with his brother who he's lost, and so you're supposed to root for him to find this gold because his brother tried to do it and he wasn't able to, and so now this is his chance to finish what he and his brother always wanted to do together. But it's like, that's cute, but then perhaps when he finds the gold he could tell the Filipino authorities. And then, since we're already being pedantic, we have the question of how were they planning on taking the gold home? How are they planning on taking the ship home? And I'll say this much when it comes to the villain of this story, they were actually prepared to do something with the gold. Like, they were actually prepared to take this gold right back home to where they believe it belongs. But in the case of Tom Holland and Mark Wahlberg, like, what were they actually going to do? Mark Wahlberg is armed with a backpack. A whole backpack. Like, really? That was what you were gonna bring to this huge treasure, this lost treasure that's been talked about for 400 years? You brought a backpack? Like, have you not seen Money Heist? Have you not seen Money Heist? Money Heist is an example of a heist done superbly. I actually don't think that there will be another heist movie or another lost treasure movie that will come close to the precision, the detail of Money Heist, the forward thinking of Money Heist, because Money Heist covered every single corner many times over. And these films in comparison just look ridiculous. How is Tom Holland going all the way to this island to find this lost gold with just empty pockets to fill? If you wanted empty pockets to fill, you could have stolen anything. You could have gone to Hatton Garden instead of all the way to the Philippines. It's ridiculous. Now, speaking of Tom Holland himself, let's discuss his performance in this film. Here's the thing. Now, recently after watching Death on the Nile, I came to the realization that I don't think Gal Gadot is a particularly good actress. Or at least I don't think she has a lot of range, okay? You know, that's what I came to the realization of during my Death on the Nile review. Here, I do think that Tom Holland is a talented actor, don't get me wrong, but I also don't think he has the most range ever. And this is a problem. This is a problem because it would seem that Sony is heavily invested in the guy, but I don't think he can sustain being the lead in two very prominent franchises because he comes across as Peter Parker in both of them. I do think that he needs to err on the side of caution when it comes to just portraying the same character over and over again, because that's what I saw with his portrayal of Nathan Drake here. And I believe there was a little bit of disagreement when he was cast in this role, because I think, and correct me if I'm mistaken, that Nathan Drake is supposed to be a very suave, cool character, and Tom Holland doesn't quite embody that. That was a criticism that was coming along just, you know, based off of the announcement of his casting in the role. And now after seeing the film, I completely agree with that criticism. Like, again, they tried to add the bartending thing to make him cooler, okay, to make him a bit more suave, and also the fact that he is a gifted thief, you know, again, adds that little edginess to him. But ultimately, he's just a slightly edgier Peter Parker in my eyes. And then next up we have Mark Wahlberg, who, like I said, I'm pretty sure I've never seen in anything before. He was fine, I guess. It's weird because, like, you know, Mark Wahlberg for the longest time was like the leading man in a lot of these franchise movies, like the Transformers, for instance, and now he's kind of playing second fiddle to the next generation in, you know, the form of Tom Holland. And I think it kind of shows a little bit. Like, I think it's very much a part of that character that he feels like he has to make way for this youngin, the youths. And he comes across as, you know, a bit bitter. And also, I think the toughest pill to swallow is that he doesn't have the very best energy or chemistry with Tom Holland on the screen. Like, I just didn't buy their eventual friendship. It just felt like Mark Wahlberg was tolerating Nathan Drake rather than warming up to him. And then I also wanted to add in my thoughts on Sophia Ali, who portrays the character Chloe. She is a fellow adventurer and fortune hunter, and she is really good in this role. You know, she is the typical kind of girls get it done character, you know, this female character who's very smart and very proficient in what she does. She's an expert in her field. But at the same time, I do think that Sophia Ali adds a little bit of her unique flavor to the table and makes the character, you know, somewhat interesting and decently dynamic. So yeah, I enjoyed her portrayal of the character. And I already talked about Tati Gabrielle and how much I enjoyed her portrayal of the assassin character as well. I will say that they were kind of alluding to the idea that Tati Gabrielle's character has a history with Mark Wahlberg's character, which I think is preposterous because she looks more in line with Tom Holland's age range than she does with Mark Wahlberg. Like, who are we fooling? I feel like she was miscast to some extent, even though I think she was great, because she needed to be older to convince me that she would have a history with Mark Wahlberg. How old is Mark Wahlberg? Like in his 50s or something? And how old is Tati Gabrielle? Like, no, okay. And finally, when it comes to Uncharted, another criticism that I had is that the film doesn't spend a lot of time actually doing some cool exploring in like nature and cool environments. A lot of this film takes place in like a plaza in some European city, which I think for American audiences may seem like exotic and cool. Like, oh my god, they're in this plaza in like Barcelona or something. And that is cool, sure. But like, if you have a film called Uncharted, you're expecting a little bit more exploration of uncharted territory instead of going around hunting for very obvious clues in places that, let's be real, would have been knocked down in 400 years. Like, absolutely. You're telling me there is a 400-year-old wall in a club, in a nightclub, that isn't preserved, okay? It's just chilling there. This wall is literally a part of a nightclub. In 400 years, it hasn't been damaged. Like, nothing has happened to it. It hasn't crumbled to dust yet. Please. Anyways, I know there's a lot of very old architecture in Europe, absolutely, but it needs to be preserved. Like, it can't just be chilling in a nightclub, especially if it's clues to a lost treasure, whatever. There isn't a lot of exploration of uncharted territory in this film. I would have expected more of this film to take place in like a jungle or something, again, a la Jungle Cruise. So the fact that it mostly took place in like busy city streets, in these places like a nightclub or a church, or even a Papa John's, I just didn't find particularly interesting or impressive. And so with all of that being said, I'm going to be giving Uncharted a 6 out of 10. So that's it from me. Now that I told you guys my thoughts on Uncharted, it's time for you guys to let me know what you thought of this film down in the comments below. Please be sure to subscribe to catch new videos coming up. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.